trade. Okay, so namely, it's a closed economy system. Okay, but from now on, we'll start to relax that assumption. Okay, and assume that this country can trade with other countries, and capital can flow in and out this country. Okay, so that is the basic topic for today. So here in this chapter, I'll talk about the openness in goods market first, and then in openness in financial markets. Okay, so when we talk about openness, actually there are basically three dimensions for openness. First, openness in goods market. That means we can have export and import. Okay, so basically that means we can purchase imported goods, and our firms can also export the products they produce to other countries. Okay, and I think you know that there exists restriction for this kind of openness. So it's impossible that we can have 100% of openness in goods market. Okay, for example, we have tariffs, and we have quotas, we have other forms of barriers for trade. Okay, so and that is why we have WTO. So WTO and GATT played a very important role in removing the barriers for trade. Okay, but in the recent 2 decades, I think WTO is losing its role in removing those barriers. So nowadays we see a lot of free trade agreements, okay, like RCEP, like CPTPP, okay, and those and so on and so forth. And the purpose for those agreements is to still remove the barriers for trade. Okay, so this is the first dimension for openness. And the second type of openness is openness in financial markets. What does that mean? That means we can, here, Taiwanese can buy American stocks, like the stock of Apple, Google, okay? But if we don't have this kind of openness, Taiwanese people cannot do that, okay? So openness in financial markets means that capital can flow among different countries freely, okay? And for sure, we can imagine that there's no 100% openness in financial markets as well, okay? And there exists capital controls, which place restriction on the ownership of foreign assets, okay? All right, so this is the second type of openness. And the last type of openness is openness in factor markets. And what does that mean? That means firms have the ability to choose where to locate their factories to produce, okay? And as workers like us, we can choose freely where to work. But I don't think you guys can, right? You guys got to get some permit, right? Otherwise, you won't be able to work here, okay? But I think in Europe, because it's EU, okay? So the openness in factor or labor markets, okay, for example, is more is higher than other places, okay. So today I'll basically focus on just the first two dimensions of the openness, okay. Okay, first, openness in goods market. So basically that is what countries can trade with each other, okay? And of course, that means what? That means we will be able to have export and imports. So let's first look at the export and imports of the United States since 1960. Okay, so in this picture we can see exports as the purple curve and the import as the blue curve. Okay, and of course this is not the trade volume itself, but what? It is the share of export and import in GDP. Okay, so in the beginning of this period, we can see that both export and import are about 5% of the GDP. Okay, and both export and imports grow. Okay, to I think right now it's on average 12%. Okay, 10 something percent. Okay. So from this picture, we will be able to observe two things. First, the U.S. economy is becoming more open over time, right? Because both export and import grow over time. Okay, so we can see that the U.S. is more open over time, and trades more than 2 times as much with the rest of the world as it did just 40 years ago. So that is our first observation from that picture. And the second one is, although imports and export have followed broadly the same upward trend, they have also diverged for long periods of time, generating sustained trade surpluses and trade deficits. So basically, what does that mean? That means, I think you must know that, right? If export is greater than the import, that means trade surplus, right? Net export is positive, okay? So, and if it's the opposite, we have the trade deficit, okay? So during the 40-something years, we can see that in the beginning of this period, the U.S. had trade surplus for some years, right? And eventually the two were close to each other. And eventually in 1980s, the trade deficit has become significant, okay? And for a short time, in the beginning of the 1990s, the trade deficit has shrinked, but not for long, okay? And afterwards, the trade deficit has expanded, okay? And nowadays, I think it's bigger than this, okay? If you are interested, you can Google, okay? So that is the basic trend for the export and import for the United States. Okay, so this is the second observation we can see from that picture. Here, it seems that export and import, or the trade share in the GDP, is a measure for openness in goods market for the United States. But let me tell you that it is not the only measure, okay? Another good measure or better measure is called what? Tradable goods. Tradable goods. A good index of openness is the proportion of aggregate output composed of tradable goods, or goods that compete with foreign goods in either domestic markets and foreign markets. So what does that mean? That means among the American GDP, what percentage of American GDP is tradable goods? Okay? And nowadays it is 60%. I think right now it's more than that. Okay? So if we measure the openness in goods market for the United States using trade share in GDP, then it's only 10-something%, right? But if we use another measure for openness in goods market for the United States, it becomes 60%. It's much higher. this is just for your information. Okay, so this is the United States. Let's look at this number for other countries. Okay, so ratios of export to GDP for some other OECD countries in the year of 2006. For the US, it's 11%. Okay, and for Japan, it's 18%. For UK, 30. Germany, about 50. Switzerland, about 50. Austria, 60. Netherlands and Belgium, higher than 80. Okay? So, can you guess how come the US ratio of export is low? Can you see any clue? So what affects this number for different countries?
The domestic market.
Domestic market? Yeah. Country size, right? So the US is big country, right? So this number is smaller. But for Belgium, Netherlands, they are relatively smaller countries. So for Taiwan, this number should be bigger, right? Okay. Any other factors? Domestic market, right? Country size is one. And the other one is what? Here, I'll give you two. The first one is country size. True. Tariff. Nowadays, because of WTO, the tariffs are roughly quite low. Over the world. So tariff, okay, yeah, but it is not the main factor.
Industrial capacity?
What?
Industrial capacity?
Industrial capacity?
Yeah.
Maybe.
And United States export they changed their industry to move to China. So
Outsource.
yeah, outsources.
But I think maybe it works for some countries, but not for all countries, right? Okay. One group, when you export, you need to ship your products, right, overseas, right? So if you are far from others, then it's more costly for you, right? Then you probably will export fewer stuff because it's costly, right?
Not necessarily, I think.
What?
Not necessarily, I think.
And on average,
Switzerland is landlocked, Austria too.
Switzerland, but it's closer to European countries.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, right? So here, the other one is distance. Okay? For example, Japan is a big country, right? I think you believe, right? Its GDP is quite high as well, right? But its ratio of export is not that high, it's only 20%, okay? And that is because Japan, because it's surrounded by sea, right? So when Japan exports, it always needs to ship, right? I wouldn't say it's 100% correct, okay? But we may have other factors. But two main factors are distance and country size. All right? Okay, next. So in chapter 3, when we are in the closed economy, right? When we want to purchase goods, what we purchase is all domestic goods, right? But here, because we allow trade, now when we want to buy something, okay, the first choice is whether to buy or not, right? And if we want to buy, the second choice is what? to purchase domestic or foreign goods. Okay, so now we have two choices, buy or not. And then the second, domestic or foreign. Okay? So when goods markets are open, domestic consumers must decide not only how much to consume and save, but also whether to buy domestic goods or to buy foreign goods. Okay, so not only consumers have to do so, right? Firms and government, right, also need to make these choices, right? Because we have C, I, and G, right? So consumers, firms, and government, they all need to make these choices. Okay, now let's look at this second choice. So when we want to make a choice whether to buy domestic or foreign goods, what will affect that choice?
The price.
What?
The price?
The price, the relative price of domestic and foreign goods, right? True. So if domestic goods are cheaper, then we buy more domestic goods. And then our GDP will be higher, right? But if our goods are more expensive, then people will buy less domestic goods. And then our GDP will be lower, right? Okay, true. So central to the second decision here, namely here, is the price of domestic goods relative to foreign goods, or the real exchange rate. And I'll talk about real exchange rate later, okay? So before I talk about real exchange rate, we need to talk about nominal exchange rate, okay? So nominal exchange rate is this. Nominal exchange rates between two currencies can be quoted in one of two ways. First, as the price of the domestic currency in terms of the foreign currency. And second, the opposite. Right? Okay. So for the first one example can be, let's say the domestic country is the US. The foreign country is UK. Okay? So for the first one example can be this. Okay? For the second expression should be the opposite, right? So it should be this. Right? So we can basically express nominal exchange rate in either ways. Okay, you can choose. Okay, so here is what? The value of $1 is 0.55 pounds. Okay, so basically we put the US dollar in the denominator. And the other one is we do it up in opposite way. Okay? In this class, I use the first one. Okay? We need to be consistent. So in this class, I use the first way to express the nominal exchange rate. Okay? And usually we use capital E to denote nominal exchange rate. Okay? So this is how how we define nominal exchange rate. Okay? So here, the price of the US dollars in terms of the UK pound is this. Okay? Okay, after we decide to use the first expression to denote nominal exchange rate, we will be able to define appreciation and depreciation. Okay? Okay, the nominal exchange rate is the price of this. Okay, so this is how we define nominal exchange rate in this class. Then, an appreciation of the nominal currency, namely the US dollar, is an increase in the price of the domestic currency in terms of the foreign currency, which corresponds to an increase in the exchange rate. Okay, so we call an increase in E to be appreciation. Okay, while a decrease in capital E as depreciation. Okay? So this is the definition in this class. Don't ask me why, because you should choose one of them. Okay? I choose this because E rises. That means the value of the US dollar rises. Right? Rises. So it's more consistent. Okay? For me. Okay. Sometimes you will see two other terms, namely these two, revaluations and devaluations. They are similar concepts, but they are different. Okay? So when we say that there are appreciation and depreciation in terms of in the nominal exchange rate for some currency. So the background is what? The background is that country adopts floating exchange rate system. Okay? Floating exchange rate system. Okay? What does that mean? That means the value of this currency is determined by the exchange rate market. Okay? But when we talk about revaluations and devaluations, that means what? That means the nominal exchange rate changes under the fixed exchange rate regime. For example, 40 years ago, Taiwan adopted fixed exchange rate regime. That means the central bank determines the exchange rate, not the market. Okay? So when the central bank says that, okay, the nominal exchange rate should go up, then it will go up. Okay? It is not determined by the free market. Okay? So under fixed exchange rate regime, we call an increase in E revaluation and a decrease in capital E as devaluation. Okay? In short, these two occur under floating exchange rate regime. And these two occur in fixed exchange rate regime, in short. Okay? Is that clear? Okay, good. Now let's look at the nominal exchange rate between the US dollar and the pound since 1970. Okay, so let's see. we can see that. Okay, here. First, overall, it seems that in the long run, the dollar appreciates, right? Because the value of the dollar in terms of pound rises. So we have that trend, okay? And second, it fluctuates a lot, right? Okay. Let's see, although the dollar has appreciated relative to pound over the past 4 decades, this appreciation has come with large swings in the nominal exchange rate between the two countries, especially in the 1980s, right? It appreciated a lot, dollar, right? And then depreciated a lot during 80s, okay? So that is the observation we can see. So that is the content on this page, right? The trend increase, right? And we have large fluctuations. Okay. Next. Okay, now we are done with the nominal exchange rate. Let's talk about the real exchange rate. Okay. Let's look at the real exchange rate between the US and the UK. So here, I give you one example to illustrate the concept of real exchange rate. Okay, so here we use epsilon to denote real exchange rate. Okay, now, this example. If the price of a Cadillac in the US is 40,000 US dollars, and a dollar is worth 0.5 pounds, then the price of a Cadillac in pounds is how much? This times that, which is 20,000 pounds. Okay? So one Cadillac is worth 20,000 pounds. If the price of Jaguar in the UK is 30,000 pounds, then the price of a Cadillac in terms of Jaguar will be how much? This divided by that, okay, which is 0.66. Okay? So who can tell me what is the unit of this number? What? Yeah, Jaguar. Right? Yeah. So this tells us what? The unit of the real exchange rate is what? Is the goods. Okay? So the American, so the here, 0.66 is the real exchange rate. Okay? It represents what? It represents the price of the US good in terms of the UK good. But here, the good is what? The car. Okay? So one more general way to do this is what? So here we put the prices of the two types of cars. Okay? But if we want to generalize this concept, we should use what? The prices of the goods and services in the two countries. Okay? And that will be what? That will be what? The GDP deflator, which is the price index in the two countries. Right? Okay. Now let's start to construct the real exchange rate here. So basically, the picture here is just a generalization of this example. Okay? For example, here, the price of the US goods in the dollars is P. Okay? That is what? That is this number. Okay? So basically, we just follow the same steps to construct the idea of real exchange rate. And then the price of the US goods in pounds is what? P times E. Okay? And the price of a jaybird, right, in the example is that, right, is P star. So the price of the US goods in terms of the US goods, UK goods is EP divided by P star, right? Which is denoted by epsilon. So this term is basically this number here. Okay? So now we're done, right? So we have found a general representation, a general way to express the real exchange rate, namely epsilon equals E times P divided by P star. Okay? The nominal exchange rate times the US price level divided by the UK price level. Okay? Okay, so for this epsilon, of course, we still have the concept of appreciation and depreciation. Okay, so when epsilon rises, we say that we have an appreciation. Okay, when it falls, we say that we have a depreciation. Okay, so when epsilon rises, namely this, we call that real appreciation. Okay, what does that mean? That means the price of the US goods in terms of the foreign goods rises. Okay, namely the domestic goods, the value of domestic goods rises. Okay, and when epsilon falls, we call that real depreciation. Okay, which means what? Which means our goods, the value of the domestic goods falls. Okay, and what does that mean? That means for foreigners, our goods are cheaper. Then they will buy more, right? Other things being equal, right? Okay, so when we have real appreciation, that means our goods are more expensive. So foreigners will buy less of our goods. So our exports will fall, right? And at the same time, because foreign goods become cheaper, so we will buy more foreign goods. So imports will rise. Okay? So here, let me write it down. When epsilon rises, our goods are more expensive. So our export will be lower. But we will import more because foreign goods become cheaper. Okay? It's the opposite if epsilon falls. Okay? Now let's look at the nominal and real exchange rate at the same time in this picture. So this picture shows the real and nominal exchange rates between the US and the UK since 1970. So in this picture, we use blue to denote nominal exchange rate and the purple for the real exchange rate. The first thing is what? The nominal exchange rate seems to rise in the long run. And for the real exchange rate, the long-term trend seems to be what? Depreciation. So these two have opposite trend. Okay? So E is rising over time, but epsilon is falling over time in the long run. So that is the first observation we can see, right? Capital E is rising, and epsilon is falling, right? So that's the first thing. But if we look at the fluctuation, we can see that they seem to share similar trend, right? when one is rising, the other one is rising, right? Except for the opposite. Okay. So that is the two observations here. While the nominal exchange rate went up during the period, the real exchange rate went down. And the second, the larger fluctuations in the nominal exchange rate also show up in the real exchange rate. So how come? How come we have the first observation? We have that phenomenon. Okay, let's see. Epsilon is EP divided by P star. Right? Okay, we know that in the long run, this guy is rising. Right? So it must be that this guy is falling over time, and the magnitude is bigger to overcome that rise in capital E. Right? So we know that we have this phenomena because what? Because P over P star is falling over time. Okay? And the effect of this is stronger than the rise in capital E. It must be that. Okay? Okay, so what does this mean? P over P star is falling. P is what? The US price level. P star is the UK price level. Okay? Normally, these two numbers should go up over time, right? Okay? So these two variables, these two price levels go up over time. But we have this kind of phenomenon. Why? That must be P star rises more faster than P. Namely, the inflation in the UK is stronger than that in the US. Okay? High, namely the inflation rate, right? But the UK is bigger than that in the US. Otherwise, we won't have this kind of phenomenon. Agree? Agree? Okay, so that is this. Two things have happened since 1970. First, E has increased. The dollar has gone up in terms of pounds. Second, P over P star has decreased. The price level has increased less in the US than in the UK. So the inflation rate in the US is smaller than that in the UK. So that P over P star decreases over time in the 4 decades. Okay? Any questions so far? Where's Mike? Is Mike better?
Yes,
I know that he
told me
terrible.
he went to the doctor. Now he's almost here.
Really?
He's driving to here. Yeah.
Here? Today he will come?
Yeah, yeah.
Ooh, wow. Thank God. Really? It was in a very terrible situation, right?
Yeah.
This recent month, right?
Mm.
Okay. God bless you. Okay, any questions? No? All right, let's move on. Okay, till now, what we talk about is always what? Bilateral exchange rate, right? The exchange rate between two countries. Okay? So the next idea is, the concept is multilateral exchange rates. Okay? Namely, the exchange rate between one country and other countries. Not only one other, but other countries. Okay, and one common multilateral exchange rate is to use the trade share as weights to calculate the multilateral exchange rate. Okay, so this table shows what the country composition of the U.S. exports and imports in 2006. So from this table, we can see that the U.S. trade with Canada and Mexico quite a lot, right? So the share is about 22%, right? And the U.S. also trade a lot with European countries, right? And the share is 30%. And the U.S. trade a lot with Asian countries, right? So here we have 23%, right? And same for the imports. So the U.S. imports a lot from different areas. Okay? So, so we basically can use this information to come up with weights, okay, to calculate multilateral exchange rate. So bilateral exchange rates are exchange rate between two countries, and multilateral are what? Between several countries. For example, to measure the average price of the U.S. goods relative to the average price of goods of U.S. trading partners, we use the U.S. share of import and export trade with each country as the weight for that country, or the multilateral real U.S. exchange rate. Understandable?
Just the
Not
weight.
that clear. Okay, fine. So here, the key words is what? We use the U.S. share of trade with each country as the weight. Okay? Let me give you one simple example. Let's say the U.S. Trade with three countries. Okay, country A, B, C. Okay, and the real exchange rate between these two countries, U.S. and country A, is epsilon A. Here we have epsilon B. Here we have epsilon C. Okay, epsilon is real exchange rate. So these three numbers are bilateral, real exchange rate between two countries of U.S. and the other one. Okay? Okay, now we want to calculate a multilateral real exchange rate between the U.S. and other countries. So we want to calculate this number. Okay, so this number is the U.S. between the U.S. and all other countries. Okay? How can we do? Yeah, we can calculate the weighted average. Right? So here we have these informations, right? Epsilon A, epsilon B, and epsilon C. Right? So we can use what as our weights? Trade share. Okay? So here, and let me denote the export from the U.S. to country A is XA, and A is, so these two, XA is the export from the U.S. to country A. NA is the import from country A to the U.S. Okay? So these two are the trade between country A and the U.S. And of course, we can have the same two numbers, right? For countries B and C, right? between these two countries, we have XP and NP, right? So XP is the export from the US to country B. NP is the import from country B to the US. Okay? And we have XC and NC for country C. Okay? And because the US only trade with 3 countries, so the total export for the US should be XA plus XB plus XC. Agree? And the total import is NA plus NB plus NC. Agree? Let me just finish this, okay? Okay, and the trade share, the trade volume should be what? For the US, should be export plus import, namely the sum of these two. Agree? Okay, so now let's just finish this weighted average, okay? So what weight should we use for epsilon A? We use this export plus import of the US, namely the trade volume, okay? Here we put XA plus XB, and A. So this is the overall trade volume of the US. This is the trade volume between the US and country A. Okay? And let's say this is 1/2. Okay? Here, the same thing, right? So the weight here for epsilon B is AXB plus NB divided by X plus N. So this is the weight. And let's say this number is 1/3. And lastly, for this weight should be XC plus NC divided by X plus N. So this is another weight. And let's assume that this is 1/6. Okay? Now we can calculate, right? Because we have all these numbers, we have all these weights. So in the end, we can calculate one number here to express the multilateral real exchange rate between the US and other 3 countries. Okay? Done. Let's take a break.